And in the planning department, we dealt with the landslide because of development. People who wanted to build, but they had to deal with the landslide and geology. That was all through the community development, planning and building and safety.
That was 26 years ago.
Yeah, that was 26 years ago. So I knew all about this landslide and the history of it. And so that's what I want to kind of start off with is the history. And you've seen all the coverage of this it gets a lot of media attention, and I've been, in fact, KFI is going to be interviewing me right after this on some of the latest stuff. So
cool.
There's a lot of interesting things, and I often say to people about the landslide when I speak, I go, it's interesting from my role as a city manager, like how do you deal with this landslide to help protect the people and so forth. But then there's the other side of it that I find really fascinating, and that's the engineering part of it. This is an act. This is like Mother Nature, and you're trying to use engineering and science to battle and try to get in front of this landslide, and that's quite a challenge. And so it just kind of tells you engineering and science can do a lot, but it costs a lot. And so there's a cost benefit, and cost is a big factor. So let me talk a little bit about the history. So I said I knew about this landslide coming here, and over the last 26 years, I really got to know this. But the landslide in Rancho Palos Verdes, the Portuguese Bend landslide, started in 1956. It is an ancient landslide. When I say ancient, it is old. It is thousands and thousands of years old, but it was inactive. It was an inactive landslide. What happened was in 1956, LA County, so the city didn't incorporate, so the city of Rancho Palos Verdes did not become an official city until 1973. So we're about 50 years old. We're celebrating our 51st anniversary. But under LA County wanted to take Crenshaw Boulevard, which ends at the top of the hill here, and they wanted to extend it down to Palos Verdes Drive South. So Crenshaw Boulevard, the route for Crenshaw Boulevard was going to come down this way, come around, and then essentially work its way all the way to Palos Verdes Drive. This is Palos Verdes Drive. I think you guys drove it this morning, the bumpy road and all that. So the idea was to bring the road all the way down to here, so it extends. And Crenshaw Boulevard, is one of those major spines throughout LA. And what happened was when LA County was doing grading, they were moving all this earth to accommodate the roadway. They were stockpiling all this earth, and earth is heavy. The weight of the earth combined with the rain activated this ancient landslide that had not moved for thousands of years. And it has not stopped moving since 1956. So it is known in the world of geologists that this is the fastest, largest moving landslide in North America. Most landslides, this is a really interesting situation because the federal government, the state, the county, they're all going, well, we're used to landslides, a sudden shift of the earth, it starts and it stops. Right. So they know okay, that's how we respond to that incident. They're like, your landslide has not stopped. How can we try to help you if it continues to move? And that seems to be this dilemma we're having with government. But because it hasn't moved or hasn't stopped moving, it's been proven to be a challenge, and it's been a costly challenge. I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was wondering, did the city of LA know when they were paving the new road that it was an inactive roadside area?
And it was the county, it wasn't the city. They probably had an idea, but they probably thought, okay, this is just an ancient landslide and it's not going to cause a problem. It's 1950. I wasn't even born then, so I don't even. The records back from 1950s, 60s are not well kept like the records are today and stuff. And that's another challenge. But a good question. I know there were lawsuits. We're still trying to figure out what was involved in the lawsuit in the 1950s.
The lawsuit that was settled.
Yeah, the lawsuit settled, and what was interesting that the county settled with the property owners at the time, but didn't take their title. So they basically said, okay, we're going to pay you out for the damage that we caused, because there were all these homes that were in this area right here that were destroyed. They were built before they complete. There was a pier over here. There was a beach club. All the stuff that was built in the early 50s, all that stuff was leveled. The county paid them out. But typically, when there's a land use settlement like that, today, if you're going to give someone the money, you're going to take their property. You're going to say, okay, give us your title, because now it's a natural disaster area. We don't want you to build there again. They didn't do that, and so all these people not only did they get the money, they got to keep their properties there, and that's proving to be a problem today, because if you knew this area is moving and you didn't take their title, you let people stay. What you don't know, a lot of these homes here have moved since 1956. They are gradually sliding with the land. So they have moved 400 to 500 feet from where they were originally built. What people have done is they put their homes on cargo containers and these steel beams, and it just glides with the land. And so someone is living in a house where their property, their legal property that they're paying taxes on, is actually 400 to 500 feet upwards. Oh, and so they're not even on their legal lot. And what was interesting is what's happened in recent years is people who own the lot that the house is on is suing them, saying, you're trespassing. Every time you come to enter your house, you're trespassing on my property, so you need to pay me rent because your house is on my, and homes are selling, and for some reason they're not getting disclosed in title. Wow. and they're getting by. Yeah, so it's a crazy situation. But so going back to the history, 1956, what started moving, so what the county triggered was this area right here, which is known as the Portuguese Bend landslide. So that area started moving. It caused all this devastation to structures. And then in the 70s, there was a series of atmospheric rainstorms and El Nino rainstorms from the 70s. And what happened, it accelerated the land movement. So this slide started moving further towards the ocean. And what it did is, as it's moving towards the ocean, it was pushing up against other land masses. And what happened is in 77, it activated all these other landslides. And so what we've come to learn here is the ancient Portuguese Bend landslide complex is outlined in yellow. Within this landslide are 5 subslides. And Portuguese Bend is the largest one, but you have Abalone Cove, which is up where Wayfarer's Chapel is at, to the west of us. And by the way, where are we? We are right here, right now. So we're not that far from the landslide. In fact, if you were to walk all the way up this road, you can probably see signs of it. There's the Klondike landslide, which is not far from us where we are now, but we're on stable grounds. Don't worry about that. And above us is the Flying Triangle landslide, and then within here there's a landslide called the Beach School landslide. So all these landslides were triggered. They started moving. Everything started moving in the 1970s, and not at a rate that we're seeing today, but it was at an accelerated rate back then. And so the residents, and the city incorporated in 73, so we were a fairly new city when all this started happening. So the city council's like, okay, what do we do? We're a new city. We don't have a lot of money. How do we deal with this? And the residents are saying, how do we deal with this? And so what the residents did, and this is really interesting, is at the time, the residents said, okay, we've got to try to stabilize this landslide. How do you stabilize this landslide? And so there are all these studies that were done in the 60s and 70s. And basically what these studies were saying is what's causing this land to move in this landslide is water. Simply put, water is the culprit for the land to move. And the reason that's happening is water is getting into the ground, and the ground has a soil condition called bentonite. Bentonite is volcanic ash, and it's a clay-like material that when it gets wet, and if anyone's ever worked with clay, when it's wet, it gets very slippery. So there's a layer, a strata layer of bentonite that when water gets into the ground, it creates this slippery condition, and then it starts to cause this horizontal movement. But then what we've also come to learn is the way this bentonite works is at the toe of the slope by the ocean, as it works its way up, it eventually daylights, so it's exposed to the surface. Where it's exposed at the surface, upslope, water, whenever there's a rain event and water just kind of sheet flows towards the ocean, well, if the ground's all fissured and there's a lot of fractures in the ground, the water enters the ground. And when the water enters the ground, depending on where it enters, if you've got this bentonite that's like here and the water enters underneath it and it starts to work its way down towards the ocean, has nowhere to go, it gets trapped at the toe of the landslide and starts to build what's called artesian pressure. Artesian pressure, so it has nowhere to go, so it starts to just build this energetic pressure, and it starts to work its way upward, and sometimes geysers break, like it penetrates through the slip plane, and then you have this geyser of water just kind of shooting up because of all this pressure. We've had those situations here, but that causes what's called subsidence, where it causes the ground to start to drop. So, but if the water enters into the ground above the volcanic ash, it causes horizontal movement. So what we're seeing in this landslide is both horizontal and vertical movement. So what the residents said is, look, we got to deal with this water. We got to get it out of the ground. And so the residents started to install these pumps to pump out the water from the ground to relieve that pressure. But it costs a lot of money. And so what they did is, in 1978, legislation was written in Sacramento. A bill was introduced, and it passed, and it formed what's called in California geologic hazard abatement districts. And these districts basically levy property owners to collect money to try to pay for these remediation efforts. So in Rancho, Palos, Verdes, the two districts that were formed, the first two in California were here in this city. ADCLAD, it's an acronym, stands for Abalone Cove Landslide Abatement District, and then Klondike stands for Klondike Canyon Landslide Abatement District. So you if you own property, you pay property taxes. These people that live in these districts, like if you live in a special library district or fire district, you pay an added tax to pay for this remediation effort.
Is it just based on property, or is it based on property value?
So the formula is not based. It's very different for these assessments. It's based on the improvements, because the improvements create impervious surfaces, which generate runoff. So it's all based on that and how much you pay into it. But what's interesting is a lot of people who were paying their property taxes and paying this assessment didn't realize what they were paying for until just recently. So this is this map here. I'm not going to get into all the details here, but what we have to monitor the movement is we're using GPS, and the GPS points are all these blue dots here, and this is a vector map that essentially we take the GPS measurements and we do it. We were doing it every quarter. And up until recently, it was every quarter. Now we're doing it on a weekly basis to understand the degree of movement. And so this information we just put together to show the public how much movement is occurring in which direction the land is moving. So the current geologic conditions, because of all the rain that we had in the last 2 years, the landslide was historic. Remember, I said it's the largest, fastest moving landslide. It hasn't stopped. Well, it was only moving a few inches a year. Over the last year and a half, that rate of movement went up to a foot a week. So can you imagine? I mean, just look at your table. I mean, this is almost like about a month and a half of movement of the ground. I mean, it has caused
Don't have to pay rent to that guy anymore.
no, and you've been you drove the roadway. That roadway has moved so much in the last 2 years. And unless you've been here and you drive it often, you have nothing to compare it to. But I can tell you, it's dropped so much in it.
You can see the old roadbed.
Yeah, it's incredible how much. If you go into some of the neighborhoods in the last year and a half, you can see where it's dropped like 10 feet from where the original road was to where it is now. There's an area in the neighborhood, and I appreciate you not going there. The residents they freak out when they see people coming in. But the road, and I have a photo of it, has dropped like 15 to 18 feet in just the last 2 years. And so this is just a heat map that shows where the active area of the movement, we're seeing movement in about, I want to say almost 700 acres of this overall landslide complex. This is about 700 acres. It's more or less like 1,100 acres, the entire ancient landslide complex. But the movement is roughly 700 acres. The red is the area of the most severe movement, which is right in this area. It used to be this area right here, but in the last 2 years, it shifted. The whole pattern, the behavior of this landslide has changed in the last couple years. So, and this is showing that out of this whole area, the most of the movement is happening at the toe of the landslide, which is right at the ocean. And so these are some photos that show what's happening. You were on PV Drive South. We call this the ski jump. And this has always been a drop, but what happens is if you're not familiar with this territory and you're just driving it, your car is just gonna free fly right over. Let me tell you, we've gotten so many claims from people that drive this and don't know, and they don't adhere to the warning signs. They get to this point here and they end up just bottoming out, airborning. You could see all the skid mark, like all the damage. There's so many claims that people have been filing. I mean, every council meeting we've got 5 to 7 claims of people.
But isn't that a county road?
No, it's a city road. The city. We have been in a typical year, we spend about $1 million repaving this road. We have to do it every so often. In the last year, we spent $9 million paving this road because it's been moving so much. This area has dropped so much that we almost had to close the road. The grade is probably like about 28%. And when you're in a van, you don't realize it, but when
we went up, when we were slow up, it was like I was lugging it.
But when you're in a car, it's a very different experience when you're in a car versus a van, and how you feel that steepness. But it is quite a challenge. And then this is the neighborhood. You probably see it in the news a lot. The media covers this area. This is right in the neighborhood, right below us. This photo is old. It has dropped more. This is probably from winter. It has dropped about 18 feet. It's just, there's a graben that's opening up and it's just sinking, and the homes are just, they're buckling and they're sinking into this graben, which is basically what's happening is on this side of the graben here, it's not moving at all, not even an inch. On this side of it, it's moving a foot. So you're seeing that differential. As it's moving, it's dropping. And so this graben, which separates the stable area from the unstable area, is going all the way down to Palos Verdes Drive South. So we're starting to see other streets opening up. And our fear is that if this happens on this road, we're going to have to close that road. And if you close that road, and these are all the different layers of complexities. If you close that road, which is a major road, all the homes around it are not serviced by police or fire or paramedics anymore because they can't get to it. And for that reason, that's the only way in and out, correct. And for that reason, we have to then evacuate all those homes become red tagged homes. You can't occupy them. So we have to then displace hundreds of people indefinitely because of the road. So I mean, that's, you look at all the layers of the complexities here. So I think you'll find.
And just to be clear, that's even if your home isn't moving. It's
Yeah.
Because you're in that area.
Because you're inaccessible to public safety. I mean, who would have ever known if you live in where you live, and if something happens and like down the street from your house, and paramedics and the police can't get to you, they have to respond in a certain time frame, you'll be forced to evacuate until that road is repaired. So from your perspective, you may find this really interesting. So this was all covered in the LA Times about 6 months ago about a new beach forming in California, in our city. What's happening is similar to plate tectonics, where you've got different plates moving, and there's this convergence of where one plate slides under another. You're having a similar situation here where you've got, remember I was showing you the 5 different slide planes? You've got one slide plane that they're converging with each other, and one is going underneath the other. And so what it's causing is this uplift of the ocean floor. And so in this area right here, this green patch, all this right here was the ocean floor. It is now, this all happened in the last 6 to 7 months. So if you came out a year ago, the condition was completely different. And you may be able to see this off Palos Verdes Drive South. If you pull out in one of the turnouts, you may be able to walk up to a certain area to see this. But it's all part. This is a private community, and it's a private beach, so you can't really get down into the residential neighborhood.
What's the name of that?
This is the beach club, which is it's right below us here. Yeah. So this is fascinating. It was just on Monday, I had a powerhouse of delegates come down. I had Adam Schiff come down, Ted Lieu, our assembly member, our senators, and they were all blown away by this, because this is all the ocean floor and how it's lifted. So let me just, how do you deal with this? How do you use engineering to deal with this? What we were looking at doing for about 10 years now, even before all this acceleration started, the city was looking at doing a dewatering effort where we would actually extract water from the ground using what's called hydroggers. They're a well that go, instead of going vertically into the ground and pumping out the water, they would go in horizontally. You come in, you'd penetrate like from the bluff here, you'd go in horizontally, and I have an example. You go in and you go under that slip plane, which is the bentonite I was telling you about. You go underneath it, and what happens is, using the pressure, you can pull out all that water and reduce the pressure that's building up, and that should stabilize the landslide. This project cost $33 million back in 2020. And as a city, cities have what's called a general fund. The general fund is sort of like a bank account that pays your everyday expenses. And so for our city, every year, our general fund is roughly $37 million. I know it sounds like a lot, but to run a city is a lot of, it costs a lot of money to run a city, trust me. Just your police is like about $10 million of that $33 million, just to put things in a pie diagram for you. This project costs $33 million, so it's almost like a year's cost of the city, and we can't afford it. We couldn't afford it. So we started, and this is when you start playing politics and you start knocking on doors at the county, state, and federal level to try to get help. And then they tell you, no, we can't help you. We don't have money. We're in a deficit. So when you hear all the media about budgets and all this stuff, and there's a deficit, and the state's got money, we got a surplus, now we have a deficit, it affects everything. It starts from the top down, it trickles down. And when a city comes in and says, hey, we need money to stop this landslide, sometimes what they tell you in the world of politics is, that's your problem, that's a rich person's problem, that's a city problem. And they literally say that to you. They don't say it in front of cameras, but they say it to you behind closed doors, and when you leave, and then when they're in front of a camera, they say something very different. That's the reality of politics. Let me tell you, I can give a whole lesson on that whole experience. But so back in 2020, we started asking. We were going up to Sacramento. We were trips to Washington, and saying we need help to stabilize this landslide. And we got the response that we got, and we basically said doing nothing isn't an option because something is going to happen. We know the water table is rising. All this artesian pressure, we know it's rising. I think you'll find this interesting. At a point a year and a half ago, the water table was about 6 feet below the surface. So on this ground, there was water about 6 feet below you. And you could start to see that because the ground starts to buckle and looks like waves and stuff. So we got nowhere with this project, with the funding. And so what we ended up doing is applying for this federal grant through FEMA. And we ended up getting selected for 23 million of the 33 million. But we did some more testing, and we came to learn that the where we thought the landslide was at, based on all of our modeling, from the rain that happened in January and February, we discovered that something different is happening. And so we said, before we spend millions of dollars on these hydroggers, let's do some more testing. And what we ended up learning is we drilled deeper into the ground. We went about 300 feet into the ground, and we discovered that there was another landslide plane. There are two planes that was moving, and that deeper landslide was actually moving faster and larger than the upper plane, and that's what was causing all this catastrophic damage.
1,000 feet down or something?
It was 300, no, it's 300. So the original slip plane is 160 feet below the ground. So that bentonite I was telling you about is essentially 160 feet into the ground. We then discovered around May that there's a deeper slip plane that's about 300 feet below the ground. So that horizontal hydrogger couldn't work anymore because it can't go that far deep into the ground. So we had to figure out an alternative.
I'm just curious, wouldn't the extracting of the water cause even more subsidence?
You would think, because it would create like this cavern or something. No, it doesn't do that. The way the pores in the ground, no, by extracting the water, it wouldn't do that. And you'll never remove all the water. What you're trying to do is just remove the first few feet of that artesian pressure, so that you release all that pressure. But you'll never remove all, and you don't want to remove all the water from the ground. You just want to remove enough of it that it doesn't lubricate the slip plane and that it releases that pressure. But that's a good question. So what we ended up doing, just in simple terms, is instead of going in horizontally, we decided to go in vertically with wells. And so what we and it took a while for us to get these installed, because you want to test the ground and make sure where the water table is, that you're going to put these $2-3 million wells in a location that you're actually going to yield results. So we spent the summer doing testing, and ultimately in September we installed in this area, which is right below us here. We're right about here. It's on the beach where I showed you that photo of the uplifting. So right at the cliff there, we installed 6 wells, and these wells basically look like a pool filter. If you've ever seen like what a pool filter looks like, it's just this PVC pipe that is about yay high, about this wide, but it goes 300 feet into the ground. And this motor, like a pool pump motor, is pulling out all this water. So we have 6 of them in this area here. And September 13th, we started operating these wells. And in the first day, each well was pulling out about 120 gallons of water a minute. So I always say, think about you've got a milk carton at the supermarket. We were pulling out 120 of those milk cartons in 1 minute. Per well. So we were looking at about 700 gallons. So, and I say this because within a matter of days, based on those GPS points, we started to see a significant drop in the rate of movement. The geologists that are on this, the geotechnical engineers on this, were saying because of the foot of movement a week, they thought that these wells that were going in vertically would be sheared off because the ground is moving, and that in 1 week it'll just shear off. We'll have to come in and spend some more money, put in another pump in, and so we budgeted for that, and it turns out we're like 7 weeks into this, not one have sheared off because the rate of movement has now in this area is zero.
Wow,
it is now moving at no rate. It's not moving at all. It is completely stopped. And so last week, the city sent a letter to Southern California Edison, to our utility company who shut off all the power and all the gas to all the homes here. So just imagine you not having power for 1 day. Can you imagine not having power for like 2 months? These people have lived in this area for 2 months now with no gas, no electricity. That's a whole other subject on how people are resilient and go off the grid. But we are now, I show this map because this was taken just earlier this week. It's showing zero movement, and we're not showing any movement here.
So with rainfall, expected rainfall, would the pumps be able to match rainfall?
So that the next step in all of this is how do you prepare for winter? Because the rain, good question, because when it rains, and that rain, if the ground's all fissured, it's just going to go right back in and recharge that water table. And so what we've started to do is this winterization plan. We have 6 natural watersheds that feed into the landslide. So all of these are like blue line streams and natural watersheds. The public and everyone's going is very nervous about rain and these watersheds, because what's been happening, I think you'll find this interesting, is normally these watersheds, when it rains, all that water just is diverted to the ocean. That's the natural flow. What's been happening is, because of all the fissures in the ground, about 70% of the water from a rain event ends up in the ground, not in the ocean. So that's why that water table rose so much over the last 2 years, because of the significant rain events. So what the city's doing is we're going in under temporary measure, and I'll tell you, earlier on, the weather forecast for winter was going to be a relatively dry year. They were saying it was going to be a dry year. Last week, NOAA published a very different forecast for California. They're now expecting more atmospheric rivers this year. I know it's mostly geared for Northern California, but it'll probably work its way, and they're saying as early as December. So we're all cringing, going, okay, we got to get in there and do something now, because we're reducing the water table, but it may just be a vicious cycle here. So what we're doing is, we started earlier this month, is we're going in and we're filling in all those fissures. What is unfortunate is you turn around and you look at all this open space, that's all part of a nature preserve. All these canyons are part of a designated and protected nature preserve with all this wildlife and protected habitat. We're having to kind of clear all of that, and so there are those consequences that we're dealing with, but we're doing that all through emergency orders that were declared by the governor and the president. But our city actually has, we have what's called a Natural Communities Conservation Plan. It's through the state Fish and Wildlife. We have this plan that protects all this open space, but we've had to deviate from this plan under emergency orders. You got to do what you got to do to protect property and life and stuff.
So you guys are doing like large scale vegetation clearing
Yes,
to find the surface, and then you're doing your action. And then at some point in the future, there'll be some restoration or whatever.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening. We've had to basically mow over and remove all this habitat. I mean, a lot of habitat. So just do.
Roughly what percentage of the reserve is that? Is that like 10%? Is that like a third?
So we have 1,500 acres of open space that's protected in what's called the Palos Verdes Nature Preserve. In fact, we have 33 miles of trails in our city. 11 of those trails have been closed because the ground has moved so much. If you're walking on a trail, there's areas where it drops 40 feet. Like it just goes into this fissure, and we've had horses fall into it where we've had to rescue. We had a dog fall. We're telling people don't go in this area, and then they go in there. Their dog's off leash. The dog falls into this 20-foot abyss, and they're like, okay, we gotta get a helicopter. Yeah, you had a question.
What are you guys using to fill the fissures?
Dirt. So what's happening is as we're mowing the habitat, we're shifting dirt around from one area to the other area because we don't want to bring more dirt from offsite because that adds weight. And remember, that's what triggered the whole landslide in 1956. So we got to be very mindful not to add more weight, which then just causes the land to move more.
What do you do with the water that's being pumped out? Do you chuck it to the ocean, or is it
It's going in the ocean. Yeah, we tongue-in-cheek say that we're single-handedly contributing to the sea level rise because all this in a matter of like 6 weeks we've pumped out about 15 million gallons of water. I mean, it's crazy when I have been down to the ocean floor and I'm seeing these pipes that are just, it's clear water. I mean, it looks like it's not, you can't drink it, but it looks like these like geyser, like these really clear, like expensive water that you would buy in this bottle. It looks just like that. That's just coming out of the ground. And I'm just looking going, I can't believe all of this is just coming out of underneath what I'm standing on. It's going right. We're pumping it into the ocean.
Are there any planned studies for that? I mean, couldn't that impact all of your nearshore ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it can. I mean, we're operating under emergency orders here. So all of a sudden, all those layers of protection and studies are waived and suspended just to deal with the emergency. But at some point, we're going to have to go back and study. And one of the things that we started to do 10 years ago with our project before all this land movement accelerated was how could we reclaim that water and repurpose it, right? For irrigation, golf courses, parkways and things like that. But there are complexities with that because in order to reclaim the water, you had to treat it and all sorts of stuff. And they said it was almost like it was cost prohibitive.
We have to deal with on a federal side with any species that are impacted by the Endangered Species Act. So you have black abalone, Palos Verdes blue butterfly habitat. Are there any others that you've had to deal with, like the federal, like there's different regulations for endangered species?
Right, and we do. We have there's federally protected and state protected species here, and that's all part of our NCCP HCP. We have a habitat conservation program with the federal agencies, and then the NCCP with the state agencies. But because of the emergency orders, all of that's been waived. But we're tracking, and we're going to have to do mitigation as soon as things stabilize. Yeah.
For filling in the fissures, compaction requires a lot of water, right? So then you're putting more water.
We're not compacting it. We're just filling in. We're just smoothing things out, the idea is we're smoothing the fissures out so that water can't penetrate. And typically what you would do is use some sort of material to actually bind and prevent water from, we're not doing that. We don't have time to do it. We can't afford, we're just moving dirt. And then what we're doing is we're putting what's kind of like a pond liner. We're putting this liner over these canyons so that water just sheet flows. But the other issue is the city can only do what we're doing on our property. These canyons run on private property too. So we're trying to work with the private property owners who are saying, well, why doesn't the city come in and do it? Well, we're saying we can't afford it. We can't come on your property. We don't want the liability. Plus, you're paying into the district. Remember, I told you those 2 districts. The district should be paying. So we're having discussion. There's so many different layers of complexities here of different who's responsible. Let me tell you, everyone starts pointing fingers. You need to do this. It's your fault. It's the utilities' fault. When I'll go back to January 2023. I was up in Sacramento meeting with our legislators and trying to get money for our $33 million project, and it was storming like crazy. And that was first band of atmospheric rivers, and it was storming, and the ground wasn't moving at the rate it was. But I said in about 4 months, we're all this rain that we're experiencing in December and January, we're gonna see the results of that. And sure enough, what happened in April and May, the ground started to pick up. You started to visibly see, without even looking at studies, you can go to the neighborhoods, you're seeing cracks, you're seeing homes starting to buckle. You're seeing all these signs and you're going, okay, this is what's happening. But what was most visible was pipes were breaking like crazy. In all this open space, we had water pipes, you've water, gas lines, sewer. These pipes were breaking on a weekly basis, sometimes we had water pipes breaking on a daily basis, and all this water would be just gushing for like a couple of hours until the utilities came out. And people are saying, well, this is where it gets really interesting, because this is when the lawsuits get filed. People are claiming that it was the water from the pipes that caused the land to move. And you're going, well, what came first? Was it the land move? Was it the land moving causing the pipes to break? And was the land moving because of the rain, or is the land moving because of the pipes break? So that's the whole. I'm not going to get into the lawsuits that are being filed and all that, but so that's basically the landslide. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's an incredibly challenging situation you guys are dealing with.
It really is, and there's so many ways to look at it. I think I was talking about the engineering, and all of this is engineering. I mean, this landslide has been moving for 70 years, right? And so people then say, in a community of this size, and we're spending all this money for a certain area, people who live outside the area are going, well, why are you spending millions of dollars of our taxpayer dollars on a problem of people that knew about this? Why did they choose to live there? And it's interesting, if you follow like what people post on social media after an LA Times article is published, people in LA County are even saying the same thing. And so that's a very delicate, you've got this line that you're walking on. Like, what do? Do you not help people? Do you help them? How much money do you put into it? But and people keep saying, the city, you need to do this, city, you need to do that, but we only have so much money, and otherwise we're going to go bankrupt.
How much of so this is a perennial thing with disasters. How, in your discussions with state or federal folks, and they were saying like, oh yeah, no, we don't have money or can't fund this. How many were, if you can put a number on it, like we're like, oh yeah, no, we like don't want to do this, versus sort of the moral hazard risk of, well, okay, I guess we could do this to help your community here, but with Miami about to go under and all this kind of other stuff, like, you know, we can't. I'm worried about the precedent that would be set if we were to help. Did that ever come up?
In so many words, yes. And you know what's also interesting is when there's a natural disaster, I think there's this public perception that government comes in and helps everybody out. There's all this money gets funneled into this disaster. You see the hurricanes that are happening back in Florida, and you think all this, and you think FEMA's going to come in and help you. That's not how it happens. It really, I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't happen that way. First of all, people were saying to individuals, were saying, my home is falling apart. I could show you some pictures of homes that you will be blown away. I mean, people have had to move out, and people think, oh, FEMA's going to come in, buy my house, give me money, make me whole. Nope, doesn't happen. In fact, when you break down the Stafford Act, which is federal law that basically administers FEMA, individuals, you all, if you're directly impacted by an earthquake, fire, individuals' assistance to individuals is rarely deployed unless there's major destruction, like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of homes have to be leveled. And in that case, the maximum amount of money that an individual will get for that disaster is $42,000. That's it. So you got to read between the lines. Like FEMA's putting out all these notifications regarding the hurricanes, and if you're not paying close attention, reading between the lines, they're saying help is on the way. Well, what happens? FEMA's in the business of not helping individuals. They're in the business of helping agencies, cities, counties, and the states, help them get by and just to help stabilize the area after an incident. For Rancho Palos Verdes, we said, okay, with all this rain, we're going to put in damage for reimbursement for damage. They are denying all of our, in fact, I was told yesterday that you're being denied for all of your requests for reimbursement. And we were asking like $30 million.
The governor declared
Yes, and that's because this is the kicker in interpreting laws. They're saying this landslide started in 1956 and hasn't stopped. So it's not an incident tied to the rain or tied, so we're not going to reimburse you. We don't even consider it. There's no start or end. And we're saying our counter to that is, well, it was moving, but we can demonstrate with data that it changed, the behavior of the landslide changed because of the rain. And for that very reason, that's the start of the disaster. And the end is where we're saying it's now stabilized. They're denying us, and we're going to appeal it and go through that process.
The exception is if we had a special act, if Congress did a special appropriation for funding.
So we asked last week. So I think what's going to end up happening after the election, there's a bill that's going to be introduced for an appropriation for a natural disaster. We submitted to Tedley, which is one of the reasons why he came out on Monday, and with Adam Schiff most likely becoming the next senator for California, he came out as well. We're basically saying for all that disaster aid they're gonna try to fund, but then there's politics behind that. It may never pass. For the hurricane and the wildfires, we're asking for an earmark of $20 million. It sounds like it's a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, I mean, this bill is probably going to be like $1 billion or something like that. So what's another $20 million? Yeah.
Besides the wells and helping relieve the stress on the ground, is there anything the city is doing to like incentivize leaving the area, or is there?
We're exploring that. Yeah, I mean, people don't want to leave. They don't want to leave. If you drive into these neighborhoods, you'll see why. People have lived there for years. So they've been there since the 70s. They know. They're like, we're fine. We'll ride this. We'll be fine. My house is just going to ride with the land. It's going to be on someone else's property. But
fresh water source pretty soon.
Yeah, all those people that live in that area, they know their house is on someone else's property, but they just kind of live with it. They have like this gentleman's handshake, you know, where, okay, you're on my legal, it's okay, it's cool, it's fun. And the interesting thing is, most of these properties, when the utilities shut off the power and the gas, these residents went solar, they went generators, they went battery, they put propane in. They found ways to go off grid, and now SCE the city's saying, okay, we want you to re-energize. In fact, our wells, all those wells, they're powered. We're a customer of Edison, so when Edison shut off the power, we said, you are shutting us off from being able to stabilize this landslide. They didn't care. So our wells are being powered by generators, and generators are not the long-term solution. They cause environmental problems. They have a fire risk. I mean, people jerry-rig these generators, and if they can spark a fire. They put fumes out. They're noisy. If you go into one of these, if you go into the neighborhoods now, you will hear and smell the fumes from the diesel generators, and you'll hear it's very noisy. But what they all do is the residents turn them off at night, like around 9 o'clock. Everyone turns off their generators out of respect for one another and to kind of keep it quiet. So they're just the people who live in these affected areas. Are really very neighborly.
Could ask a slightly different one, which is what proportion of the tax base for the city is in one of the actively moving areas?
So we have a population of approximately 42,000 residents. This is about 300 households out of that. So it's not a huge percentage of the overall city, which is also another issue. I mean, you're spending 35 in the last 3 years, we have spent $35 million in 3 years just dealing with the landslide. So the public will say, well, what about my issue in my neighborhood? What about my traffic light? What about, you know, this issue, that issue? You know, how come you're ignoring us, you're neglecting us? So that's something that a city council has to consider. So the road that you were on, through the landslide, that is a major arterial roadway for the city on this side of the peninsula. So the overall peninsula, the Palos Verdes Peninsula, we're like somewhere around 76,000 residents on this peninsula. We have 4 cities, and there's a road network called Palos Verdes Drive. There's Palos Verdes Drive East, West, North, and South. This is south, and it serves about 15,000 trips a day. And so it connects the San Pedro Long Beach area to the Redondo Beach area. And then in addition to that, when you were driving it, you probably saw these big pipes on that were above. So those are a major sewer trunk line that serves thousands of properties from Palos Verdes Estates all the way this area, and it takes all that effluent, the sewer, to a sewer treatment plant. That ruptures. It's a major environmental disaster. And let me tell you, we've had some minor leaks, and I say minor because it could have been worse. But LA County Sanitation, which monitors, and there are 2 pipes because if one ruptures, they divert the sewer. But if the whole thing were to go, that affects so many households that what the backup plan is, and let me tell you, there are so many backup plans, but for the sewer system, what would happen is, in order for people to stay in their homes and be able to flush their toilets, trucks would have to would take all that sewer water and just take it to the sewer treatment plant. So we would have, the backup plan would be, just trucks would be operating 24/7, just pumping all that water out.
How do you convince your state partners when you're trying to get funding for things like this? I feel like there'd be a lot of challenges because the issue is still developing and it has been developing for years and years now. Like, why wouldn't they just say, like, it's just going to get worse and you're going to come back to us in a few years?
Yeah, they did say that. So 5-6 years ago when we were talking to our state and federal leaders, they're like, well, why should we put $10 million, $20 million in this? It hasn't stopped moving. Why do you think it's going to work. And so Monday's meeting, I mean, when I had a shuttle with 20 people in there, and at one point I stopped and I said, wow, I've got really important people here, and people who make decisions, who can help influence. You know, Adam Schiff, when you, no matter where you land on the political aisle, he is on the appropriations committee. When you look at the politics of, he's on the appropriations committee in his current role, which means he helps determine where money goes. And if even if he gets elected as senator, he won't be in that capacity, but still have an influence. He knows the players. You gotta sell. I mean, this is where you're to me, I was like, okay, as city manager, I've got to really tell a story and leave an impression on the politicians, that they realize that there's a human side to this, and that that they need to understand that this is science that works. And so for me, I took them down to the actual pumps, and I showed them the pumps, and I showed them the data, and I'll tell you all, I didn't want to say that we're at zero, because I didn't want them to think that, okay, it's solved and it's stopped, but I also wanted to say that it's working, and what we thought was going to shear off, nothing sheared off, so it's money well spent. I'm being recorded, so please don't use this.
Okay. Any last questions about?
What's your perspective on, because as we were driving around, we passed by the Trump Gulf.
Mhm.
What's your perspective on those parcels of land that